Let me pause right now and bring on board my old friends, my titans of tumult, if you will. First, Amy Ridenauer, chairman of the National Center for Public Policy Research. Amy, good to have you back, kiddo.
Thank you, Alan.
On board as well, Robert Weiner, Democratic strategist, columnist, and former communications director for Clinton drug czar General Barry McCaffrey, who's also former chief of staff of the House Committee on Aging. Additionally, is the former communications director for Congressman Rangel and Conyers of New York and Michigan, respectively. Actually, he goes all the way back to the Truman administration, and he's holding up well despite his longevity. Bob, good to have you back.
The Washington administration, Alan. But if what all you got is that Holder went after the leakers of Yemen terrorists and Korean nukes, you ain't got nothing, because that was our country's security at stake.
Well, Amy, Bob brings up an interesting point, and of course that is such a rare development. I'm going to emphasize it. He brings up an interesting point. Let's look at what Holder said here. He says, well, I would say this. With regard to the potential prosecution of the press for the disclosure of material, that is not something that I've ever been involved in, heard of, or would think would be a wise policy. In fact, my view is quite the opposite. But, Amy, we've learned already from the Department of Justice that their boss, the Attorney General himself, not only signed off on the wording of a subpoena for the private emails of James Rosen from Fox News, but that such wording was based on an affidavit that accused him of being a probable criminal and co-conspirator regarding leaked classified material on North Korea in 2010, as Bob referenced. But what does that mean? It means, on one hand, Holder claims that he was never involved with, quote, the potential prosecution of the press, unquote, while on the other hand, he had verifiably done the very thing he just denied. What do you think is next for this guy, Amy?
Well, it will be interesting to see. Mr. Holder is clearly very close to Mr. Obama personally, and that is a big thing. And, in fact, that is the number one thing of all in terms of whether he stays or goes. But there's a couple of problems in staying. One is that this is not the only problem that Holder has. For example, back in the Fast and Furious days, he's made some statements that later on the Justice Department had to say were not true. So there's at least two things, and I could actually go further, that really bring to the veracity of what he's been telling Congress and the public. So let's just pretend for a moment that we know. I'll pretend I'm Bob for a minute, and I'll pretend that I know that Eric Holder has never ever said anything he did not at the time he said it believe was 100% honestly true. Even in that scenario, you have a problem that this administration has a number of scandals before it. We also have the IRS scandal and a number of others who the public is interested in. When the head of the Justice Department has questions about him, it reduces the credibility of the administration, even if that is not fair. So Mr. Holder will be doing, I think, two things. He'll be seeing what the president wants him to do, but he also is probably asking himself if he is helpful to the administration by staying, because the new person who came in, whatever else would be true about them, they would have a clean slate.
Bob, let me ask you something. We hear from everybody from Senator Chuck Schumer of New York to Gwen Ifill on PBS and others all saying, look, if the guy wasn't prosecuted, then Holder could not have lied. But if that's the case, then by default that means that Holder was involved in the falsifying of probable cause. It's either one or the other. Your take?
Probable cause for what?
For the search warrant. No, you asked me the question. For the search warrant. It's all part of the Fourth Amendment. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause. They had to get a warrant. What did they do? They hyped up this crap against Rosen. We know they hyped it up because they're saying that, what's his name? Holder is only guilty of perjury if Rosen was prosecuted. But because he wasn't prosecuted, that means Holder was not guilty of perjury. But if that's the case, then that means they falsified probable cause by calling him a co-conspirator and likely criminal as a basis on which to predicate the justification for the warrant, Bob.
I got a subpoena from Ken Starr. I got a subpoena because he wanted all my documents relating to Linda Tripp, the state's attorney, and Monica Lewinsky. The problem is...
Did he call you a co-conspirator?
The problem is he wanted to cite me for obstruction of the case. The problem is I didn't have anything like that. Prosecutors issue subpoenas all the time, but by prosecutorial discretion, they choose to not prosecute. And that's what Holder said.
But he got a hold of a warrant. In order for him to get that warrant, and I know the Bill of Rights like the back of my hand. You know I know the Bill of Rights like the back of my hand. You can't get a warrant unless you show probable cause, because what are you doing? You're justifying the mitigating reason behind the government going ahead and actually puncturing your otherwise default standing right to have yourself protected when it comes to your person's place and things. The right of the people to be protected, or the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, but upon probable cause. So he went after the private phone records and emails of Rosen only by going through with the very thing necessary to validate it in the eyes of a judge, and that is formulate what they thought to be probable cause. If we're going to believe right now that he never intended to prosecute, that means by default he was making up probable cause. Amy Ridenour, what am I missing here?
I don't think you're missing anything. I think he's got a definite problem there. I very much doubt he would be prosecuted on it because, for one thing, he runs the Justice Department, but it's something that to get out of it, you have to spin like a master. Now, Bob is a master at spinning, and I mean that as a compliment.
How about using the facts properly?
But you have to ask yourself, whether you're a fan of the administration or not, by the time the Attorney General of the United States needs spinners out on his behalf, is his effectiveness, even for the left, is it not very damaged?
Well, you're trying to create a problem that doesn't exist. You know, we've got the IRS leaks. The American people, by 70 to 20 in the Pew poll, say they care about jobs, and they want to know what about jobs. They don't care about this leak.
Have assisting me in the opining department, my titans of tumult. First, Bob Weiner, Democratic strategist, columnist, and former communications director for Clinton drug czar General Barry McCaffrey, as well as Amy Ridenour, chairman of the National Center for Public Policy Research. Amy, to you, Mr. Issa seems to be of the opinion that Mr. Holder more than likely lied, and even folks like liberal attorney Jonathan Turley of Georgetown University seem to be of similar thinking. Your sense of it's here?
Well, yes, I do agree that that's what Darrell Issa apparently believes. He was very careful in what he said, and that he was responding to questions from CNN. So there has been some criticism of Darrell Issa for even raising this subject, but it's important to note he was asked these things. But what he said is that by most people's perception, by most people's being the key thing. So he is not saying absolutely, he is not saying that there is absolutely nothing that Holder could ever say to convince him otherwise. But he is basically saying that it's worth looking into further. And I'm going to go with him and say that I think by most people's perceptions, it is worth looking into further.
Actually, Bob, latest poll shows that actually a majority of citizens in this country, when asked, do want to see an independent counsel this go around. If for no other reason, then it does seem to be an evolving mess that's going to require some strong level of independence on the issue. Bob Weiner.
Well, first I want to respond to Amy, who made a point, but there is nothing that Holder could say that would persuade Darrell Issa of anything, because Issa is on the attack, and the New Yorker did a parody of, gee, nobody's listening to Darrell Issa. He holds a hearing on the fact that nobody's listening to him. The fact is, and I come back to it, that the American people, yes, if you ask them about the scandals, they'll tell you what they think about the scandals. But then by 70 to 20, they say they don't care about the scandals because they want jobs, and the Republicans are obstructing jobs. So if the Republicans want to stay in the Bill Clinton the impeachment mode that got them defeated almost in the Congress in 1998, they can keep going on these scandals, and they can keep at it, and they can keep obstructing everything the Democrats do to try to create jobs.
Actually, I have a feeling that your rationale doesn't work, because by your own measure, that would mean so many of the things that you were ever upset with about the Bush administration should be thought of as not really that important, because on any given day, the economy or some other issue was always thought of as having a greater priority than whatever it is, the outrage that you were pointing out.
Well, you ought to look at the College Republicans poll today that shows that young voters felt the GOP has nothing to offer, and they support the Democrats. These are young Republican voters support the Democrats on the economy, on the Republicans' tax policy. They support the Democratic tax policy on health care, on
No, they don't.
student loans,
No,
on
they
contraception, on parenthood, on
Oh, you're talking about
definition
just
of
the
rape,
college. You're talking about
on
college
gay
Republicans.
marriage.
Okay, yeah. But the majority as a
So that's
whole
your
doesn't
future.
think that way.
That's
but
your
the,
future that you're looking
But the
at.
majority as a whole, well, they always change their mind as they get older.
Uh-huh.
What is it Churchill once said? If you're young, if you're not a liberal when you're young, you don't have a heart. If you're not a conservative when you're older, you don't have a brain. I mean, so people
you're
do
welcome to ignore the youth, the Hispanics and the African Americans. That's going to.
But Bob, I got to get back to you on something. You're going to tell me that none of this trifecta of scandals doesn't matter because the economy matters more to people.
That's a fact.
Then that means, by your own measure, you guys should have never been complaining about Bush about 90% of the time because, hey, every single time there was always something of greater import when looking at the polls. That's how come what you're saying makes no sense. It's a movable standard and as such is as illegitimate as it is portable. And it's unfortunate. Now I'm thinking only the slow-witted fail to see that the Holder's apologists are that Holder apologists are essentially engaged what I would call the etymological torturing of the words potential prosecution by making believe that the word potential was never said. And that allows
prosecutorial discretion. I described it in the subpoena that I got. Prosecutorial discretion means you don't prosecute if you don't want to, but you subpoena for information.
But you can't subpoena because you can't falsify probable cause if that's what it takes in order for you to get the warrant you otherwise would not.
Those are potentials. Those are not actual crimes yet.
He was called a likely criminal and a co-conspirator and a flight risk. Now, in your estimation, if that doesn't constitute a lie, what in your universe does?
Well, I want to know what prosecutor doesn't come up with stuff to get information, and you throw it against the wall of the subpoena. That's what they do.
Amy, so because others do it, it's okay.
Well, the bottom line is that everyone took Holder's statement in front of the committee to mean that he had not done something like authorize a warrant against a journalist like Rose.
And by the way, hold on. I want to cut in right here. I want to cut in real fast. Bob, I want to cut in real fast. We're not saying that he said, well, I would say this with regard to the prosecution of the press for the disclosure of material. That is not something that I have ever been involved in. He actually said with regard to the potential prosecution of the press for the disclosure of material. That is not something that I have ever been involved in. Now, if what we do is take you at your word and say, hey, it was just a tactic and a strategy, that would still put it under the purview of potential. And therein lies the unraveling of your argument. Amy Ridenhour.
Yes, absolutely, Alan. You're completely right. In my opinion, the only way Holder gets away with this is if he swears he forgot and people believe him. It's a big one there because it's kind of a big deal to sign a warrant on a Fox News television journalist. But, okay, fine. He could have forgotten. I think that's the only way he gets out of it.
That's the only way you think, but the reality is Jay Carney has said that the difference is prosecution versus not prosecuting.
It's my turn, Bob, and I don't care what Jay Carney has to say. During your turn, you tried to change the subject to jobs. Anytime the guy defending you has to change the subject, that's a bad sign. We have at least 2 cases in which Eric Holder said things that had to be walked back. This and Fast and Furious. And I'm going to say again what I said earlier. When you have an attorney general who twice has said things that might have been perjury, you have lost a lot of credibility with the American people. Even if he is an incredibly, almost astonishingly forgetful man. And I would say this, too. If he is this forgetful, he might need to resign just for other reasons.
You'd like that. By the
I don't
way,
care. It's going to be a liberal
on the
attorney
show,
general no matter what.
Hey, Bob, you know what? I'll be honest with you. I kind of hope they hold on to Eric Holder because as long as they do, I'm going to be beating the crap out of his sorry ass every day I can over the air. Every day I can over the air. And any of my colleagues I can convince to do the same, I will. Because if this man is not somebody seen as having lied, then who will ever be seen as having lied? Who will ever be seen as having lied? If this guy isn't lying, who is? If this doesn't constitute the definition of the word lie, what does, Bob?
It's such a cosmic question. I want to be precise, and he didn't say prosecute. He said that he said investigate. There's a difference.
No, he said prosecute. He said with regard to the potential prosecution of the press for the disclosure material, which means that he did not have to prosecute in order for him to be shown to be a liar. The fact that he prefaced the word prosecution with the word potential, that matters. I mean, this is what I mean by the etymological torturing of the words potential
If you're going to
prosecution.
speculate on all kinds of things that
Not
might
at all.
happen,
I'm being
there's a lot
very
out there.
denotative in my analysis. By making believe that the word, quote unquote, potential was never said, that allows their claim that just because Rosen of Fox News wasn't prosecuted, that somehow Holder's testimony wasn't a lie. But guess what? If Holder's testimony has become the new low standard for how much one can stretch the truth before he's tagged as a liar, then nobody will ever again be seen as perjurious, as giving perjurious testimony to Congress.
Perjury takes a very, very, very high bar, and Holder did not meet it.
He lied on point. What else has
he
to be
didn't
met?
lie. That's a specific word, and he didn't meet that criteria